This is Six African Trade Talks. Six African Trade Talks is a media partner of Intra-Africa Trade Fair, an initiative of Maxime Bayen in collaboration with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat and the African Union. Our guest is Maxime Bayen. Maxime is the head of venture building and lead venture partner Catalyst Fund. He is also co-founder Africa, the Big Deal. Welcome to Six African Trade Talks. Maxime, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. So, Maxime, please take us through your journey and experience with investing in Africa, with investments in Africa thus far.
Oh my goodness. I'm not sure it's going to fit the 25 minutes time we have, but no, I started working in the ecosystem back in probably was 2014 or 2015. Back then, I was part of an organization called GSMA, where I supported a program called the Ecosystem Accelerator, and we were giving grant funding to startups in various markets, including in Africa. And fun fact is the first startup I supported with funding in Africa was, back then it was a small startup. Now it's a big one. It's called Twiga Foods. And so that was the first one. Since then, I've been investing and working with over 50 startups across the continent, usually as a venture builder. So meaning working super closely with the startups on day to day for a period of time, usually around 6 months to a year. And I've also angel invested in a number of them directly or indirectly. And it's been a fun journey so far. Learned a lot and still learning every day.
What an interesting journey. And investing in Twiga, who would have thought when everyone else is investing in, I know it was early days, but when everyone else was looking at tech, the less complicated things, you went and invested in bananas as an example. So that's quite interesting, eh?
Yeah, definitely. And I remember very vividly the meeting where I had to explain to my colleagues what model Twiga was deploying. And there was a lot of questions in that meeting and people were really thoughtful. And it wasn't an easy sell. Because what they were doing was a little bit unique at the time. And I loved how they were positioning it back then. It was really, we're doing with banana what Amazon did with books. And that was definitely an interesting startup to work with in the early days before their model became a thing.
Certainly. And that's Africa. The opportunities, I think your story is quite an interesting one because it just shows us what really Africa is all about. What lessons can you share that can help someone who wants to invest in Africa based on your journey? Maybe 2-3 lessons.
The first one is definitely spend time there. Spend time in the markets where you're considering to invest. Look and see by yourself. That's the first one. Spend time with the founders locally before you invest. I think it's super important. And that takes me to the second advice is really to try and understand beyond the model, beyond the idea, even beyond the traction, what are the founders driving the startup. Trying to understand what drives them on a day-to-day, and especially because that could be actually number one advice is to invest at a very early stage. I think it's always more interesting and exciting and needed. And so therefore, when you invest in early stage, it's important to really spend time with the team and understand what they are, who they are, why they're building what they're building. So that would be my 2 advice. Third one, I would say don't be fooled by copycats from other regions that are being launched in Africa, because there is always a need to localize the solution strongly. Something that sticks to me always is if you're looking at a startup in Africa that is just launching an app where people need to pay with a credit card, your addressable market is going to be tiny anyway. So that might fly in different markets around the world. It's not going to work in Africa. So it's one thing that in Catalyst Fund we call tech and touch. And I think it's very core to most successful startups in Africa. It's this mix between tech and touch, or online and offline if you want. And this idea that it's not just going to be an app. It's not just going to be digital advertising. There's going to be some physical and offline work that needs to be done. So yeah, that I think is the third piece of advice is look for models that have this tech and touch.
Interesting. We've had quite a number of interviews and different guests, and this is quite unique what you've said. I don't remember hearing it from anyone else. So this is the power of having different people with different views. So very impactful what you've shared. What is the lowest and highest ticket for you when it comes to investment? And what process can one do, or does one go through for you to invest in what they're doing?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, I would speak on the name of Vitaly's fund that I work with. And yeah, it's quite straightforward because we invest exactly the same amount in all the companies, which is basically always going to be a $200,000 investment, half of which is in cash and the other half is in venture building for 6 months. So that's a little bit of a specificity in our model, which is that we not just invest money, but we also invest the time of our team for 6 months. We have a team of 10 people who are full-time. And we support the startups on everything from fundraising to product to tech to sales, marketing, admin, HR, and so on, financial modeling, etc., based on their specific needs. So it's a very customized, bespoke support for 6 months. And that's the second part of our investment. And we always do both together. We have done it with over 70 startups now, and we know that works. We're really always trying to refine this model, but we're convinced that at early stage, we need both the cash and the technical support in various areas. So yeah, that's why we invest, always the same, $200,000 in each startup.
Interesting. Thank you very much for sharing. And any particular industries that you're focusing on?
Yes, of course. Thank you for asking the question. We are very specific in the sector we invest because actually we are supporting startups in Africa in the sector of climate resilience. So basically, tech allowing populations across the continent to better adapt to the negative effects of climate change. Let me just break this down a little bit. When it comes to climate change, there are basically two types of subsectors. One is called climate change mitigation. And in a nutshell, that's basically tech solutions allowing us to reduce our carbon footprints, our CO2 emissions. And then you have climate resilience or climate adaptation. And that's basically a solution to help us to adapt to the negative effect of climate change. In the case of Africa specifically, we are here with a continent that is only contributing 2 to 3% of the global CO2 emissions. So really not much in terms of carbon footprints. However, the continent is also the most impacted continent in terms of negative effect of climate change. Think floods, droughts, water scarcity, climate change-induced health issues, and so on. This is a daily reality. We have, unfortunately, and very sadly, again, another illustration of that not so long ago in Rwanda with some floods. There was, of course, the cyclone in Mozambique and so on. And these events, unfortunately, we know will happen with an increased frequency in the coming years. So our approach has been to say, while it's great to, of course, reduce our carbon footprint and is needed, and it's fantastic there's an increased amount of capital going to that, we believe the most urgent sector in terms of really making an impact for people's lives is climate adaptation. So we're really bullish on this and trying to invest in those solutions. Just to give you some ideas of what maybe more tangibly what that means in terms of tech. Here we're talking about a lot of agri-tech, obviously, solutions that help farmers to adapt again to this negative effect of climate change. So to produce less water-intensive crops, to adjust their farming through precision agriculture tools in order to, again, adapt to changing environments. The same applies to aquatech, so aquaculture technology, which we're looking at as well. Another big topic for us is everything related to insurance, which is very low across the continent, but extremely needed in the context of climate change, which spans from health insurance to housing insurance to, of course, agriculture insurance, crops insurance. We are investing in solutions linked to access to water or access to energy as well, and so on. Yeah, those basically are some examples, but yeah, climate resilience is our main focus.
Thank you very much for sharing. Any travel experience or lessons from impact of technology that you'd like to share based on your experience on the continent.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Any travel experience,
Travel
experience, yeah.
Travel experience. What would you want to hear specifically?
You've lived in Kenya, and I presume you've also traveled to one or two other African countries.
Oh, okay.
What as an investor and business person, and also as someone that is gone to different parts or different countries, what would you share that you would say, you know what, I saw this, but I didn't expect it this way, but it made me learn this, something like that. Just for those who have traveled to the continent.
That's a good question. So I actually, just to rectify, I haven't had the chance yet to live in Kenya. I went to Kenya a lot, but I haven't lived there. Although our headquarters is in Nairobi, but I don't live there for the moment. And so, yeah, I've traveled in quite a few markets. I haven't done a recent count, but probably across Africa, maybe 10, 12 different countries at least. And some of them repeatedly. I just came back from Cairo 2 days ago, for instance, in Egypt. What can I share? There's so much to share, obviously. I think what I would share is it's important as investors to travel to given markets, to do due diligence on a given startup. It's really important to try and stick with customers where they are. And in a lot of cases, especially in the field we are in, this requires going outside the main cities and so on. I think it's really important because it's an eye-opener in terms of the problems we're trying to solve. And sometimes it validates or invalidates some of the assumptions, but it's really critical to see that there. Basically, keep in mind that what we're seeing in capital cities, in urban areas, sometimes is not necessarily the reality of most of the market. It's important to get both. Get a feel for what's going on in urban areas, but also areas, especially in the sectors that we're looking at. Yeah, that's one thing I would share. And but the chance to, for instance, recently spend time with some startups in Senegal or Egypt. And again, I went to speak with some of the customers that are in aquaculture or farmers. And this is the best way, I think, to get a feel for what's really going on.
Amazing. So, Maxime, what are the top 3 deal breakers or top 3 factors that would motivate you to invest?
So, to invest or not to invest, because you said deal breakers.
So, top 3 deal breakers, which is then not to invest. And then top 3 factors are those that you would look at to invest.
Yeah, of course, they're all
pretty good.
Deal breakers. Number 1 is an investor that doesn't see the truth. Sorry, yes, but not an investor. There are some investors that also don't see the truth, and as a startup, you shouldn't go with them. I meant founders that don't say the truth. So, that, for instance, we tell you, we have X amount of customers, and then eventually, when you're looking at the data room, you realize that you don't have customers at all, or that the number is much lower, and so on. So, really don't lie to investors, because it's a trust contract. And if you start on some lies, it's not going to go far. That's number 1 deal breaker. Number 2, in a lot of cases, it's traction and validation of the product. So in our case, we invest in startups that already have some customers, ideally already have some revenue. And a lot of cases where we say no, it's because it's too early. So it's not a deal breaker, an infinite deal breaker. It's a deal breaker for now. But I think that's quite an important one. Another one that, is not an easy one for founders, but it's quite important is, again, at the stage at which we invest, which is pre-seed. So it's not idea stage, it's the pre-seed stage, is when founders are not full-time on the startup they're trying to fundraise for. We know it's a bit of a chicken and egg because they need the money to be full-time and they need to be full-time to get the money. But again, in our case, it's like, we're going to invest, we're making a big bet on you. If you don't even make the bet that is going to fly enough that you can allocate your entire time to it, then why would we? So that's a big one. So if you have 2 jobs in parallel, maybe it means it's too early to fundraise. But it's definitely not a good sign for us as investors. Then 3 things that we look out for that we like. Of course, the team, the founders, and even more than the founders, the CEO, who is she, who is he, and does he or she matches with us? Because again, we have the specificity of providing cash investment, but also venture building. There needs to be a match in terms of the people we work with. They need to be coachable and keen to progress with us. Otherwise, there's not much value we can bring. So that's what I would say. So we really, at the end of the day, backing the CEO and funding team. So that's super important and definitely something we spend a lot of time assessing. Yeah, I'm not saying anything new. All the investors would say the same, especially at early stage. Another big one, and here I want to be maybe a little bit provocative, but it's again because it's the specificity of our fund. What would encourage us to maybe invest is two things that we have a mandate on, which is to back local funders. We have a mandate to have at least 80% of our portfolio companies who are run by local funders. And the second one is female funders. And here it's an objective of 30% of our portfolio funded or co-funded by female founders. That's definitely something that that we're looking at carefully. And so I would definitely put that. The last one, again, at the end of the day, we are of course looking at impact. And it's what I said, we're talking about climate resilience and so on, but we're a VC fund, which means we have investors and we have to make some returns. And we spend a lot of time looking at unit economics and making sure they're looking good, both in the unit economics and traction. I think in the past couple of years in the ecosystem, we're probably looking a little bit too much at traction and not enough at unit economics. So we're spending a lot of time looking at both and making sure that the model makes sense from a commercial standpoint. So that's what I would share. Sorry, long answer.
Not at all. It's insights. So it's better they come in their full form so that our listeners will also learn from that. So thank you very much for taking your time to explain. What is the one thing that you would like to share with the audience, if any, that we might have not captured so far about investing in Africa?
I remember in one of we captured, I talked about the climate resilience, big topic. We talked a little bit about local and female founders. I think it's absolutely critical to have a lens on this. Maybe I would say pay attention to what's going on outside what we call the big four markets: Egypt, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, which today represents still over 75% of all the funding that goes to startups across the continent. But there are a number of markets that are up and coming, as we would say, and a number of ecosystems that are growing fast. So I would encourage investors to look at other markets like Senegal, Morocco, Tunisia, Ghana, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda. There's a lot of things happening in those markets. And I really encourage investors to take a look because maybe they're a little bit less, let's say, on the radar in terms of startups in the ecosystems, but some of the startups there are doing really brilliantly. Yeah, that would be maybe my point.
What you have just said brings back some memory. In our past episodes, we've got an episode where we interviewed the founder of Chari, which is valued more than $100 million in Morocco, which is a Morocco B2B e-commerce platform. And it's definitely what resonates with what you're saying, to say there are other markets out there that are outside the big four that have got real traction. Even the big four, they didn't start as four. So definitely it's to look at those other ones that have got great potential. Any book or podcast you'd like to share?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned sharing. I know them really well as well. I'm a big fan. Book or podcast, can I share? I'm trying to think. So I have to confess, I tend to learn mainly to podcasts in my mother tongue, which is French. So there's a lot of podcasts in French about startups, mainly in French.
But you can share. There are some of our guests that would also be able to benefit. And
Then I would encourage those who speak French to listen to two podcasts that I really love. One is called Generation Do It Yourself. So the name is in English, but podcast is in French. Another one is called Pause. Both are fantastic and interviewing entrepreneurs quite often. And they're really long. That's what really I like. It's like they're 1, sometimes 2 hours podcast. And you can really go deep in understanding the models understanding the journey. And it's I really love.
Thank you very much. To support our show, please leave a review and share this episode. You can also connect with us on social media using the handles in our show notes, or visit our website, scixpodcast.africa. See you next time.